Hey guys. Yes, manga style characters. Super versatile and useful, whether it be for comics, games, or animations. And also a lot of fun to make. In this video, I'm going to show you how I made this character in 3D, both designed and modeled by me. And throughout this video, you'll pick up some important tricks on how to improve the various parts of your characters. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So to save time, I brought in a meshed scene that I already modeled. At this point, I was feeling pretty darn confident. I mean, after all, I've done this like a million times, so it feels like muscle memory for me. I just got started doing what I always do, filling in the eyes, drawing in the lips, eyelashes using curves, and if you've seen my previous video, where I explain more in depth how to create this style in Blender, I'm using my tactic of just being very sketchy with my strokes, and just laying in the foundation at this stage. I'll lay in some darkness above the eye, mark out the eyebrow, and outline the under eye area. But I realized one issue that I'd forgotten in the beginning. The colors were very gray overall and washed out despite the fact that I had set my base color to white. And so to fix this, I switched my view transform to standard, which made the colors a lot more realistic and exact. So yeah, at this point unfazed, I continued the trek, adding in details throughout the face, mostly just being smaller, more refined strokes around those areas that I initially defined. And I really left no stone unturned, everything had to be as amazing and detailed as possible. I'll darken the top of the eye, brighten the bottom, go a little crazy, darken the lips area and outline the top and bottom, draw some eyeshadows, sketch on the nose, add some strokes to the face, sketch on the eyelash a bit, add even more eyelashes but thinner. I even used a shape key to move the mouth from its two most common positions so that I can make sure the mouth looked good both in the Cupid's bow rest position as well as in the slightly open, teeth showing position or whatever you want to call it. And after that, I just breezed through. I darkened the mouth interior, which was kind of a pain to get inside, added a cube which I quickly using subdivision modeling turned into a tooth, filled out the ear by darkening its cavities, and by that point I was pretty much done with the face. But wait, why does any of that even work? You might be thinking, okay dude, I can follow along with these strokey pencil antics, but how do you make the face actually look good? After all, just because someone watches this video and uses that strokey style, doesn't mean it's going to look amazing. And the real reason is because of this. While making this, I'm not just honed in looking at like Blender the entire time. I'm also looking at different faces that look good, and I constantly check the values of the face that I'm making to make sure that they're in the general direction of these real like attractive faces, if that makes sense. So just keep that in mind. Anyways, next part was the hair. At this point, I was kind of riding a high off of how quickly I finished the face, kind of expecting to cruise through this, so I just started laying out some black colored hair curves, making absolutely sure that they crisscross over each other and are quite varied, as after all, like real hair is very chaotic, you can see here in my head. So yeah, at this point I was still pretty confident, but there's one decision I made with the hair that resulted in it being a lot more difficult than the one in my previous character. And this reason is asymmetry. See, when you're working on a piece for so long, your eyes get kind of tired of it, and since your eyes get tired, you don't really realize the issues of that piece that you're working on. Having symmetrical hair fixes this, as you just make one side look good and it auto-reflects. So what I did for this character, as I was working on it, I screenshotted the piece and flipped it, and yeah, from there I realized all of the problems that I had to fix. Another important thing to keep in mind is that the hair is supposed to have a bit of ambient occlusion in the areas that is closest to the body, so draw in strokes in those areas as well, because it'll make it look way more realistic. Alright, with all of that dealt with, it's time to draw in the reflections. I separated the right and left sides of her head as two different materials and did all the UV unwrapping that had to be done. Now drawing in the reflections here can be pretty tricky. See, initially I was just going all over the place, sort of spraying and praying, but I realized there's a better method. What you want to do is initially draw one area of reflection where it's thin in the middle and longer on its sides, and then between two of these areas of reflections, we want to draw in lines, especially on the edges of the hair strand, and this is going to make it look super realistic and appealing. I really think like this strategy is the key to making good looking manga hair reflections in 3D. Alright guys, before we go any further, I just want to talk a little bit about my masterclass. Are you interested in learning to make high quality stylized art in Blender, but are maybe struggling on having a clear path to learning it? If so, check out my stylized art masterclass on ukiyogirls.io. This is my comprehensive stylized art in 3D class and community, where you'll not only learn how to make things like stylized environments, scenes, characters, but also my actual process for how I pick my values, colors, designs, and use observational and design strategies while making 3D art, as this is what actually drives the quality of your work, not just like the button pressing that we're doing in this video in Blender. I'll show you how to sculpt, model, and rig this character so it's ready for animation completely from scratch, as well as how to give it dynamic lighting and all all of that great stuff. Even if you're a beginner who only knows the very basics of Blender, this will completely transform you from a beginner to someone who has a serious understanding and skill, not just in Blender, but in concepting and design in general. But that's just one of the many things that you'll receive upon joining. You'll also receive access to my full series going over how I made this stylized environment from scratch, including how I made this stylized dog model, and all of the other things you see in the scene. You'll also get access to my ukiyo character model and portrait series where I show you step by step how to make this character, as well as 2 full courses going in depth on how I made these koi pond and sunflower scenes. And by the way, you get lifetime access to all of this stuff as well as updates. Not only that, but you'll gain access to my observational series as well, where I talk about my methods called the layered method and custom concepting, which is what I actually think about while making my scenes, because the process of choosing colors and values is infinitely more important than, you know, the button pressing we do in Blender. Now, back to the video. Alright, so with the hair and face done, it was time to move on to the body. But I first had to decide on what type of outfit I wanted to even do in the first place. I mean, there's so many options and fashion is just totally endless. But eventually I decided on an outfit style that I liked, which was a jacket, gloves, pants, heels, and leggings. So I got to work. Nothing I'm doing here is really groundbreaking at all, pretty much just modeling over her body. And just like how I laid in the foundation for the hair, I'm kind of laying in the foundation for her clothes at this point. By the way, don't forget to give her belly detail if it's exposed, because otherwise that area will look very boring. So with the clothing blocked out, it's time for a part that I know for a fact a lot of people struggle with: clothing folds. For jackets and regular shirts, follow this little diagram that I made. You basically just want the folds that are on the inner part to be kind of pointing up and then be horizontal as it goes down. My method for modeling these is to basically just bevel certain edges in the shirt and then puff those parts out or in. I also like to use the knife tool and then bevel the new edge that I create with it. And you know, I really just recommend you use these tactics, or at least try them, and I promise they'll help make your folds look a lot better. Okay, so at this part, feeling pretty darn good, but this next part with texturing her clothes brought even more issues. And I really want to tell you guys to persevere. Always get through that ugly phase, because it's kind of like in that ugly phase where you learn so many new things, and that's just like really where a lot of the improvement happens, to be honest. See, initially I tried just freehand drawing in reflections on her shirt, but this was just flat out boring. So I decided on a different approach, which was to use the Stylized Asset Suite add-on to add some lighting to the model and literally just bake those shadows to a texture, which gives us a very easy way to get detail onto our clothing without doing much. And after that, I literally just texture painted to make the highlights or shadows look even more appealing and good. I binarized images of jackets that I found and took inspiration to make my jacket on her look way better. For a character like this, it's best to just draw in this detail rather than modeling it. Give this a try honestly, because you'll be so surprised how even though it's just black and white, it makes it look so good. Okay, so before we continue, I just want to say, you might see the clothing color randomly switch to black. That was just me testing different values, so please ignore that. Okay, anyways, moving on. I just drew in manually some extra highlights along its edges, and also used a node setup that converted those strokes so the edges of it would be black, basically. Okay, wait, I was way too fast there. Basically, I just drew a bunch of these reflections throughout her jacket. I'll redo these later, but this is what it looks like for now. I then made a node group that just subtracted a thinner version of itself. You can see here what it's doing is taking those highlights that I drew and just outlining them in black. So now, with this strategy figured out of modeling the folds, baking the shadows, texture painting, and drawing in details, I literally just copy-pasted this strategy to all other parts of the body. I did the same exact thing here with the pants, giving it some nice detail, the leggings too, which after studying, I noticed they have this really like streaky nature. And yeah, I basically had a lot of confidence at this point, so I just continued detailing, going around the model, outlining some edges, drawing folds, and adding other miscellaneous details. And I also redid the highlights on her jacket, which I realized the best way to kind of draw these is to have this zigzag motion, where the right and left sides are basically thicker than the in-between parts of the reflection. Now, our model is looking good, but wouldn't it be cool if we could add like glowing edges like a lot of characters in video games have? We can actually really easily do that, and to do that you can just use a Fresnel node and multiply it by a crayon texture. I talk more about this in this pastel character video, and I think I might have also talked about it in my sketchy character video as well, so you can just check those. And so I basically use this tactic on all the clothing parts in her body. You can literally just copy the node group that you make here and just paste it in like every other article of clothing. And from there, With all this in place, I just continued detailing. Still wasn't sure whether I wanted her clothing to be white or black, which is why I keep switching between the two, but yeah. I continued adding highlights on edges that should catch light. There's quite a lot of these, but it's worth taking the time because it makes it look pretty cool. I also did some zigzaggy highlights on the leggings, just like this. And on the gloves too, I drew in some zigzaggy strokes to get it looking less boring. For the shoes, I used the same tactic I used for all of the other clothing. Pretty much drew in all of its detail and didn't model anything in order to avoid any headaches when it comes to rigging and exporting. One exception, however, was I did model the shoelaces. Alright, so at this point I was getting exhausted and wanted to take a break from all this texturing, and the main thing left to do was rigging. I like to just use Rigify because it's quick and easy to use, so I just positioned my meta bones into place and generated a rig from it. After that, there were still like a lot of extra things that I had to rig manually, like the jacket, collar, hair, and face. So I placed bones for her jacket, her hair as well. And after that, I rigged the face and eyes as well. Pretty much smooth sailing, but then I got to the jaw and I realized yet another problem, which is we didn't model any tongue or bottom teeth yet. And I also forgot to darken these areas around the mouth. This was super easy to fix though, I just modeled a basic tongue and bottom teeth. Anyways, at this point our model is looking good, but there's one thing we really should add to make it look even better, which is adding some sort of like bounce light or reflections in the shadow areas so it doesn't look so plain and boring. Doing this on the back of her was actually pretty challenging. I tested two main variants, which I could easily swap out if I ever wanted to switch the texture. But yeah, that was just what I did for the back there. Another thing I highly recommend you do that's going to improve the quality a lot is if in these shadow areas you draw in these sketchy lines, and these sketchy lines are going to basically further help sell that hand-drawn feel. Okay, so at this point I was feeling pretty done with it. It's time to now bridge the gap between Blender to Unreal. There's two main parts of this, the rigs and the textures. For exporting your rigs, you do want to keep in mind that only the deformation bones get exported. You should also disable any bendy bones if there are any, and I generally like to unparent all my deformation bones, so after I bake and export them, I don't get any weird stretching in Unreal Engine. Just select all your meshes and your rig and hit export. Set it to armature and mesh, switch smoothing to face, check only deform bones, and uncheck animations since we're just doing the rig and mesh for now. I then just imported the FBX into Unreal as you can see here. Now to export the shaders, I'm going to be using the Stylized Asset Suite add-on to bake and then export to Unreal Engine. To bake using the add-on, just select your nodes and copy them, create a new material with the Stylized Asset Suite, and in the base color node group just paste your nodes there and plug it into this mix node. Get rid of your old material and then you can just name your texture, set the resolution, and bake it. And boom, just like that, we've baked it to an image texture. I used multiple textures throughout the model, so if you did the same, just make sure you bake for all of your other objects as well. In Unreal, I just go to the shader editor and replace everything with the image texture, and it's up to you whether you want to add lighting or not, but I'll just set it to emissive color. The only annoying thing is that when you export them to Unreal Engine, inevitably it's going to look a little bit different, so you'll have to play around with the texture settings a bit, and maybe even go onto the texture itself and draw in on areas that became too faint or too dark. And this is why what matters ultimately is your observational abilities. Alright, moving on, I just continued assigning materials, and by the way, for transparent objects like the eyeshadow globe, which I talked about in the previous video, you'll want to make sure to set the material to translucent in Unreal Engine and use the strokes we drew for the eyeshadows as the opacity mask. And one last little thing about the shader in Unreal Engine, we lost that glowing edges Fresnel effect we had before, so you can actually just easily add it back in the shader editor in Unreal, using a node setup like this, multiplying it by a sketchy texture. So from there, if you want, you could add lighting and stuff like that, it's up to you, but this is all the textures exported. Honestly, Blender's shader editor I found to be a lot nicer to use than Unreal's, that's just my personal opinion on it. I feel like Unreal's is a bit clunky, but yeah. Lastly, I also recommend changing Unreal's focal length if you changed it in Blender, like I did, and that can make it look a lot more similar to how it was in Blender before. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something throughout this video. And if you're interested in learning to make high quality stylized 3D art in Blender, you can check out ukiyogirls.io. Have a great day!